violence was an argument for the city. It wasn't an argument of we were depicting a dystopia and the institutions didn't work.
BPD cops reported over 300,000 pedestrian stops in the last 5 years.
You guys have locked up and beat on so many people, we can't get 12 in a box we're willing to trust what a cop says.
The drug war and mass arrest and the militarization that, of police that accompanied the drug war, that has destroyed effectively quality policing and rendered irrelevant in some respects the police department when it, our modern police departments in America when it comes to actually what job one should be, which is preventing violent crime.
Hey there, I am Jeff Edgers, the national arts reporter here at the Washington Post, and today we have an amazing writer, former reporter, and the guy who you know as the creator of The Wire. We're here to talk to David Simon about his new show, We Own This City, which is on HBO. They call it a limited series. I don't know what that means today, but it's a very, very well-written, well-acted document of this gun task force that it's a true story based on a book by a former Baltimore Sun reporter. David Simon, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me today.
David, I want to talk about this show, but I think when I found out you were going to be on here and I was going to talk to you, the first thing I thought of was what I think we've all been thinking of for a while now, which is what's going on in Texas and at the Robb Elementary School and what's been going on in our country for a long time. I saw you, I follow your Twitter religiously, and this morning you tweeted, woke this morning certain that the American experiment in self-rule is over. Greed, fear, and stupidity have triumphed. So I want to ask you, how do we step forward in a moment like this? What do we do? There seem like there are some obvious steps, but also that it's been so futile to call for those for so long now.
I don't know. I wish I had a simple answer, but the fact is our governance, our self-rule has been purchased by mass capital, and there is profit in this much mayhem. And we have traded the lives of vulnerable people, our most vulnerable people, these children in school, for profit and for political maneuver. And we have one major political party that will not accept any sane gun control as a premise. So what are you going to do? I mean, you know, the only alternative we have to. Are you saying we have to vote in a filibuster-proof majority in the upper chamber of our bicameral legislature in order to do something sane, or we just have to pause every few months and clean up the bodies? I think that's what we're saying. This country's broken.
So we've been through this before. That's what makes every time this happens all the more heartbreaking and frustrating. You are someone who's been an advocate for really dealing with the prison overpopulation and getting rid of this thing that we've called the war on drugs. And you've talked a lot about gun control. I'd like to understand for you, when this has happened in the past, how do you deal with that moment of where you're at right now, which is, what's the point? We can't do anything, to here's what we do, here's how I advocate, here's how I use my voice and try to push for something.
You know, I would like to say that I have some reservoir of hope that I was able to go to this morning, but I actually sat in the car outside my office for about 20 minutes and just didn't even feel like getting out of the goddamn car. The images of those children in Texas, and it brought me back yesterday. It brought me back to remembering Newtown, a decade earlier. And I remembered that I had written something on my blog, and I went back and read it, which was probably a mistake because every damn phrase that I put down in words about what I was feeling 10 years ago could be repeated with precision right now. Nothing has changed. Nothing. And I linked to a piece by Gary Wills. I'm sure you may have seen it before, in which he invokes the American God, which is not Yahweh, it's Moloch. You know, we sacrifice our children in the name of firearms, in the name of our ballistic love. I reread Gary Wills's great essay on this, which he wrote even before Newtown, and which I had linked to in that blog item, which is still up. And by the end of it, I was drained. I mean, are you asking me what we should do? I don't know. I mean, we have a flawed document. It is not a sacred relic of infallible people. It's a legal document. It gave us slavery. It gave us women not voting. It gave us an ambiguous phrase about a well-regulated militia that has since, in Heller and other decisions, been interpreted to America's right to walk down the street with every kind of weaponry imaginable, regardless of who they are and their mental state. That document leaves a vast room for sickness and failure and pain. And the capacity for us to amend it in any coherent way to prepare ourselves for, every other country on the face of the earth that has modernized and is democratized has figured this out, and we are incapable. We are just incapable. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you this morning. This morning I am feeling like we're done. We're done.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'll be honest, I have a profession and I have a job and I have things to do and deadlines and I want to do those things. And I'm sure you do too. You have a ton of projects, but you wake up and you go, boy, what is the point of any of this, right?
The cult of death that the Republican Party has become in America is astonishing to me. I grew up in a notion where I was not going to agree on the vast majority of issues with Republicans, but there were some where I could, and there were some where I didn't see any ideological problem with certain positions undertaken by the Republican Party. I'm now 60 years old, and I can't recognize the loyal opposition that is, in fact, looking towards an American future. I don't recognize that in the Republican Party. And I know that sounds partisan, or that people want me to blame the government or blame Congress, but that's not what it is. This is asymmetrical warfare on the part of people who are not really interested in anything other than power or money.
Well, we've seen it in other countries, in Finland or New Zealand, and basically when something horrific like this occurs, a law is passed and things change. It's pretty basic, right? And we've seen it in our country over and over again, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and then things get better. I mean, the writing's on the wall. Australia resolved its gun laws, and they don't have mass shootings anymore. Other countries have done the same thing, and this is an American sickness. This is something that is rooted, and it's not good for us because the Russians are funding it. The money being heaved into the NRA by the Russian government and by Russian actors tells you they're not out to see us do well. They are adversarial to us. They want our democracy to fail. So who do they fund? They fund the National Rifle Association, and they fund our politicians, and our government is bought. And I don't know what you do with that, because our Supreme Court has basically said money is speech. Well, money is talking. Children are dying. Money is talking. The Supreme Court has given us this world. They've given us Heller, which has made gun control itself problematic, and they've given us Citizens United, which has allowed the profit makers and the gun manufacturers to achieve that which is the source of the bloodletting.
David, I do want to talk about this program, We Own This City, because I've been watching it, and I'm a big appreciator of your work. And I think if people haven't seen it, they need to. This is a true story, and I want you to explain a little bit about how you came to this. On paper, when I hear, "Oh, let's do something on the Gun Trace Task Force," it doesn't sound like the most marketable idea, right? But these characters, these stories are fascinating. And can you tell me a little bit about how this came to be?
Sure. Well, I thought I was done with Baltimore and crime. I certainly thought I live here, and my city certainly took a bite of that apple, and I didn't really want to make it take another on my account. But The Wire, which we began working on 20 years ago, was if it had one policy argument to make, and it was very blunt about it, I thought it was end the drug war. The drug war has not only destroyed communities and families and individuals, built prisons and filled them. It's destroyed law enforcement. It's made that which is the most essential police work less rewarded, less heralded than going up on the bunch of corners and making your stats and grabbing a bunch of guys and getting paid for doing that which doesn't actually make us safer. And while it's been waged, while we've done this, we've trained generations of cops how not to solve murders, solve robberies, solve rapes, how not to patrol their posts, to prevent crimes against people. We've taught them how to make arrests. And so the clearance rates in places like Baltimore and Chicago and elsewhere have nosedived. The national clearance rate for murder when I was in the homicide unit in the late 80s was 70%. It's now 35%, which means your chance of putting anyone in jail for a murder has gone from 4 in 10 in Baltimore to 1 in 10 once you shake the cases out. So we're not doing police work anymore. And here comes this scandal that I'm reading about in my local paper, in the Baltimore Sun, covered by Justin Fenton. And I wasn't even thinking about doing any more television in Baltimore, but I called Justin because I used to have that gig, and I said, "This is a book. You're onto something that really is a true coda for where the drug war has taken us. This unit that basically was not only okay, in The Wire, you saw people stealing. They kick over a mattress, they find some extra cash, it goes in their raid jackets. There's routine brutalities on the street for which police don't have to answer for. That was the culture of policing as I knew it. The idea that you would rob not only drug dealers but citizens, it's just take their money and not turn it in, not just drug dealers but citizens, or that you would rob a drug dealer, take the drugs, and then put them back on the street through another dealer. That's a level of debasement and cynicism that it took another generation of Baltimore policing under the drug war to get to. So I hadn't thought about it as TV, but I put Justin in touch with my book agent rather, and he sold it and he wrote it. And sure enough, it came back from HBO. They had an early copy of the manuscript to George Pelkanis, my co-writer on this and longtime collaborator. And George brought it back and said, we should do it. It's really sort of the end. It's a remarkable coda to what we were arguing in The Wire. And so here we are.
I mean, you make a really good point there. I thought about it when I was thinking about The Wire. The cops there who are crooked, it's almost incidental. Like, they run into something, they see the money, they can't stop but jam a little bit into their pockets. It's a system.
That goes back to that goes back to the 50s and 60s when you would kick over a numbers joint.
And this is a systematic growth of a system that's out of control, where it becomes their primary focus on the job, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. If you go back to Prince of the City, the great Lumet film, there came a moment where the U.S. attorney is challenging this corrupt cop and saying, "What did you do? Did you take the money? Did you take some of the money?" And yeah, they would take some of the money. They would even give some of it back to the arrestees. If you seized $10,000, you'd give $2,000 back to the arrestees to buy their silence, and you'd turn in $6,000. That was the New York way of 1972, 1970. So it goes back that far. But then he says to them, he says, what'd you do with the drugs? Did you take the drugs? And the corrupt cop gets up on his hind legs and he says, how dare you? No, we didn't take the drugs. I'm a cop. There's an ethos to this. The drugs went to evidence control. Not in Baltimore. Not in Baltimore. Not in 2015. We had finally reached the terminus of a drug war that has utterly devoured our law enforcement deterrent. Meanwhile, you can't find cops in Baltimore anymore. You can't find enough of them who know how to write a search warrant that will hold up in court, who know how to use and not be used by an informant, who know how to testify on the stand without perjuring themselves, who know how to work a crime scene properly, who understand the police computer database. These are all skill sets, and they're complicated skill sets that you need to solve a major crime. But why do you need to learn all that when you can get paid for making 30, 40, 50 arrests a month and handing this ground stash to this guy and 2 vials to this guy, and then showing up in court to get all your court and your overtime pay? And then at the end of the month, they promote you because you have 50 arrests you have 50 collars. And this guy who maybe worked his post and arrested 1 guy for doing armed robberies, he's got 1. So they make you the sergeant. And then you train the next generation how not to do police work. Welcome to Baltimore.
Well, there's one of the central characters obviously is Sgt Jenkins, Sgt Wayne Jenkins, who is a real figure and is now, I guess, serving 25 years for this. And it's interesting. When I read about him on paper, I don't feel badly for him. I don't feel much empathy. But when you write him and you put him into this system, you obviously make an effort to tell us about what might have motivated him, that he's not all evil, that there's more to this. And I'm wondering, first of all, why do that? Is there part of you that wants to just say, this guy is a perfect example of the problem. He's teaching the younger guys how to do this. And why do we need to bring humanity to him? But you clearly want us to understand him differently.
I certainly don't think he's sympathetic. I don't feel the sympathy on the page that maybe you do. He's written in a human scale. He loves his wife and kids. He wants his kid to make the Pee Wee football team. He has the same sort of normative aspirations of the rest of us. He doesn't crawl into a coffin at night, so the sunlight doesn't hit him. Aside from that, he's an awful character. I mean, he's destroying lives. So I'm not sure I feel as if.
But you're watching him. The reason he is that way. The reason he is that way is because he at the beginning of this, you watch him come in there as a young guy with good ideas, and he's brought in and he watches everyone around him teach him how he's supposed to be, right?
Well, he came in 2003. And if you go back to that year, you'll find a man named Marty O'Malley, who was the mayor of Baltimore. And he wanted to run for governor, and he was in the process of running for governor at the time. And he told his police department, he had a theory. He and his advisors had a theory, which is if you clear the streets of people, Baltimore was suffering with 300 murders a year, we can get the murder rate down because everyone will be off the streets. And they're less likely to shoot each other in houses than they are to have the gunplay on the streets. So we're going to clear the streets every night. And we're going to do it illegally. The Fourth Amendment doesn't exist. We're just going to fill the wagons. We're going to send everybody overnight, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. We're going to just send them down to the jail. It doesn't matter whether the charges stick. This is what we're going to do. Where everyone goes, the wagons are full. And they did this. They did this to the point where the ACLU had to sue and basically got the city to settle. But it took so long that this went on for years. We arrested 100,000 people in a city of 600,000 in 1 year, over 100,000. And the murder rate went down modestly to about 280, 270. Went right back up after they abandoned this. But what they did do was they taught police that their footpost was a dictatorship and that the Fourth Amendment didn't matter and you didn't have to build cases. You just had to collect bodies. And Jenkins came out of the academy, walked right into this maelstrom. That was his first introduction to what policing in Baltimore was. So while I don't think there's much strength of character in Wayne Jenkins, there certainly wasn't anything to teach him about what policing in America has to be. And from the very moment he hit the street, Baltimore Police Department had lost its way. And the idea of mass arrest and the drug war had excused every viable form of corruption. And it was only a matter of time. You teach police that the law doesn't matter. It's only a matter of time before the law truly doesn't matter to police. And Jenkins was the oldest of these guys. Most of these guys came on 2008, 2009. But it was a police department that had already lost its way. And once you tear down that institutional memory of how to do the job right, which let's face it, even in the halcyon days of 1985, only 40–50% of that department knew how to do the job right, but it was at least enough to maintain some semblance of professionalism. But once that's gone, once the institutional memory dies, restoring it is a hell of a job. Hell of a job.
Hey, folks, I just want to say that we have a few minutes left, but if you want to ask any questions, you can tweet to Post Live. They will get that information to me, and I will ask David directly if it's a good question. David, it's interesting. You mentioned the idea that you call up Justin Fenton after reading that article in the paper. I've been listening to the podcast of We Own This City, and D. Watkins, who's one of your writers, another one who it sounds like you read something he wrote, you thought it was good, you just got in touch with him at some point. Is that how you how you find good people, how you find good talent, how you find people who have a gift for language that can work with you?
You know, with both those guys, it wasn't recruitment. I didn't think I would end up working with them on a film project, but D showed up in the pages of the Baltimore City paper, and he had a unique voice. It was somebody at a street level from East Baltimore who was perceiving not only his neighborhood and the cultural aspects of his neighborhood, and then also the economic deprivation, but he was also experiencing the policing from a unique perspective, and he could write some, which, hey, so yeah, I mean, as soon as I started reading him, you know, I just wanted to talk to him and meet the guy because I live here. And when we got to this point of considering making Justin's stuff into a book, we realized we also needed the point of view. Well, it's basically a policing story, and it's true that the guys who did, you know, Ed was a detective for 20 years in the police department. I covered it for 15. Bill Zorzi added the part of City Hall that we needed. So, I mean, we were off and running with, you know, using the people who'd done The Wire, but this piece uniquely needed the perspective of the people who'd been policed by these guys. And, you know, I remember reading specifically that, you know, about when Danny Herzl's name first surfaced as one of the corrupt cops, about Herzl giving D. Watkins a good kick in the ribs on a basketball court. That, you know, he knew Herzl, he watched Herzl work, and that's a voice that we wanted to have with us in the writers' room for very obvious reasons. So it was a delight working with D. And, you know, you're going to hear. I mean, listen, he's already selling books he's on New York Times bestseller list. You know, he doesn't need me, but you're going to hear a lot from that guy.
Yeah, I just love how it sounds like when you first identified his writing and when you called him about this series, it's a gap of time. In your mind, you're always thinking, hey, this guy's going to be perfect for this. Now, Justin Fenton left the Baltimore Sun. He's at this new upstart publication. You left years ago. Back in the 90s, when I thought things were glorious, you were talking about how journalism was screwed up and dead. I obviously have a position here.
I didn't think it was.
And I want to ask you: is there hope here? Is there something you see in how things have gone in the last few years journalistically that gives you some hope for how we cover things?
Well, let's see. You want me to have some optimism? Okay.
You don't have to have any optimism, but I want to hear this now.
I was pessimistic enough about our capacity to ever achieve gun control and whether or not we would ever shake loose massed capital and actually govern ourselves without the money getting in the way. So let me try to be optimistic about journalism a little bit. I think the fact that we've entered this post-truth era of American politics, where you just keep lying, and it doesn't matter if what comes out of your mouth comports any remote way to facts on the ground, is scary, and it's a very gray and worrisome area for democracy. But it's also a place, you know, having it happen and having Trump happen as he did in Trumpism, and the authoritarian impulse, it shook up, I think, a lot of newsrooms. And I don't think, well, I think you can criticize how a lot of mainstream media performed during the election, during the first election. I think in some respects, the learning curve was on. And I think the number of mainstream media that is now confronting the reality that the truth will not prevail unless it's spoken bluntly. That on the one hand, on the other hand, aspects of the way in which I was taught to write reporting, it no longer applies. And that social media is, so I think in some ways there's been a good learning curve, and you're seeing more blunt and direct work by mainstream media outlets. That's to be valued. That's at the high end. That's at the national end, the places like the Post, the Times, Wall Street Journal, the places that have built-in national online subscription bases. What's struggling because, and I actually blame the high end for not reaching down and in some way contemplating a revenue stream that would include regional papers, is major metropolitan dailies in second-tier regions like the Baltimore Sun or the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or wherever you want to go, that have basically been gutted. And they I was the third buyout from the Baltimore Sun in '95. The gutting began. It preceded the internet. They started taking profits, and Wall Street realized a long time ago you could make more money putting out a crap newspaper than a good one. So, let's get 200 people out of the Baltimore Sun newsroom and let's put out a worse paper, and make more money doing it. And we bought
David,
into.
I would argue, I'm going to argue one other thing is I think it even is worse than that. I'm 51 years old. My first job was at a 3,000 circulation weekly. And I learned to cover the police beat, the school committee, the finance committee, all that stuff. And I learned that when the police busted somebody and brought out the street value of the drugs, you questioned that. I had a copy editor who, told me that. I don't think that level occurs anymore. It's impossible because those papers don't exist at all.
Right. And when I came on in '82, there were 6 people covering the Baltimore Police Department. 6. So I was not only being, I had the night beat. I went from 4 to 12 or 4 to 1. And there were day cops reporters, and there were people working on projects. And, so the idea that you were covering a multitude of beats shows you that even generationally between you and me, the cutting was happening. So yes, I listen, I think, hey, the Baltimore Sun is run by Alden. It's a shell of itself. It's a horror show. The alma mater is effectively gone. So here comes this Baltimore Banner, which is going to try to do this online. No cost for printing presses, no trucks, no newsprint, no Teamsters. Sorry, Teamsters. I love you to death. I love you when you drive my trucks to the film set. But they don't have the cost of circulation, which was always a loss leader circulation. They don't have the advertising, which was the way. But circulation now, if you can get people to pay $10 a month, $12 a month, you can basically fund the equivalent of a 40, 50, 60 person newsroom, which is about the size of the old Baltimore Sun Metro desk. If you can deliver that kind of product and get 30, 40,000 subscriptions within a couple of years, you can sustain this, particularly if it's a nonprofit, which is what Stu Bainum is trying to do in Baltimore. So yes, if this is replicable, there is some real hope for metropolitan journalism in the second-tier cities. Obviously, the Post Times, they've figured out their way. If you want me to yell at the Post and Times now, I will, because somewhere 25 years ago, the entire industry was supposed to get at a table, and they were supposed to do what basically television did, which is, and I realize we've moved beyond this to streaming, but there was a huge 30-year window where they bundled 50, 60, 70 channels together. And the loss leaders, the stuff that you might not pay for, like the Weather Channel or C-SPAN, was nonetheless funded in the bundle. You paid for all of it. And if print journalism had done the same thing 30 years ago, so that you got either the Post or the Times, you got either the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, you got your local major metropolitan daily, whether you're in St. Louis or Cleveland or Baltimore, you got your local paper covering your county or your neighborhood. Maybe you got a few sort of things, and you paid one fee, and it was divided up. The top end of journalism could have saved local reporting, and they could have done it brilliantly and heroically, and everybody would have profited. But instead, they saved themselves. And by that time,
hey, David, I was I was at the Boston Globe when the New York Times owned it. The way they treated us was pretty
Right.
grim. So, and they owned us. We have a Twitter question. Can I ask you a Twitter question? Because we got one, so I think we should use it. This is very pinpoint. What do you think happened with Sean Suiter? Can Baltimore policing be quote unquote restored?
It can be, it has to be, but it will be a long road back. As I said, the institutional memory in that department is vulnerable. If I were the police commissioner, I would be hiring back, not as sworn officers, but almost as advisors, as consultants, the retired police who once knew the job, or maybe guys who work for federal agencies that have investigative skill, and I would be planting them in units as non-sworn advisors to start retraining the fundamentals of police work. So that's, I mean, it was a long time building this horrifying edifice that the drug war made. It's the journey of 1,000 miles, one step. Got to do it. What happened to Sean Suiter? I'm probably getting one episode ahead of where we are, but someone asked, and here we are. If you understand the evidence, if you look at the practicalities of every single piece of physical evidence, Sean Suiter took his own life. It's just there. I don't think we look, as filmmakers, we took our responsibilities here very seriously. We looked at everything in the independent review, in the original homicide file. We looked at all of what was there. We looked at all the physical evidence. But I'll leave your listeners or your viewers with one thing. If you imagine, because you're inclined to think the worst of the Baltimore Police Department, and certainly in this miniseries, I'm not exactly delivering their best. So I don't have I wouldn't be adverse to saying Sean Suiter was assassinated by his fellow officers because he was going to testify. But I'll give you two things that just make it fundamentally ridiculous to be premised on that. The first is that he had been named by other officers who were already indicted in their proffer sessions as having taken money early in his career. And there's no incentive for them to do that because they're trying to get a deal. And if they screw up, if they say anything in their deal that's not accurate, they could lose what leniency they are being given for their early cooperation. So they have no incentive to name somebody who isn't involved in the earlier corruption. So I think Detective Suiter knew that the other shoe was about to fall. I don't think he was going to be indicted. I think they were talking about things that were beyond the statute of limitations. He wasn't targeted in any way, but he was going to lose his job. And that was made clear to him by the federal investigators. So he knew that even before he went into the grand jury. But the second thing is really more telling. Let's imagine the most dramatic conspiracy theory that gets everyone excited. Let's imagine that his fellow police officers want to assassinate this man because he's getting ready to testify. Why in hell would you have him out in an alley on a West Baltimore street and fight him for his own gun? It makes no sense. If you want to make it look like, you certainly don't want it coming back to you that you assassinated him, but it's easy enough to just say he was out on the streets of West Baltimore, which is a dangerous place for a cop, and somebody drove by and shot him. You shoot him twice. You make sure he's dead. You take the gun and you throw it in a it's not a police weapon. You throw it in the sewer and you're done with it, and let the cops try to solve it. Why would you go into that alley and fight him for his own weapon? He shot with his own weapon. It was a scenario that from the moment a lot of any intelligent cop, any intelligent investigator heard it, said, you could lose that fight. You could end up getting shot yourself. You could end up, you don't know what's going to happen. This is a grown man. You're going to fight him for his weapon with his partner 8 seconds away. And right. The partner's story checks out. The partner did what he said he did. So you have this man who is shot with his own gun at point blank range, presumably fighting with a suspect. And from there, you get to the idea that suspect was a cop who was. It's insane. But we have a capacity to want the most dramatic and excitable narrative to prevail. But unfortunately, in doing this miniseries, I felt a very fundamental responsibility to follow the facts as they were. And I don't think anybody who looks intelligently at what happened there believes anything other than this man had motive. he created a circumstance in which he tried to make his own taking of his own life look like a death in the line of duty.
David, I could talk with you for hours. They won't allow me to do such a thing. But I'm very grateful that you spent this time with us because, frankly, it was kind of negative, but it gave me a distraction. And now I get to go back to this normal life. And but I really appreciate it. I hope folks will go watch We Own This City and listen to the podcast. It's very enjoyable, fascinating, second level. And go to WashingtonPostLive.com and you'll see upcoming programming. And we really appreciate you watching today. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.